Hi there and welcome to this video about the infamous whaling ship, the Essex. In the early 19th century, the Essex set sail on a routine whaling expedition from Nantucket, Massachusetts. However, what happened during the course of that voyage would go down in history as one of the most harrowing and tragic events in the annals of maritime history. The story of the Essex has captivated the world, inspiring books, films, and countless retellings. In this video, we will explore the events that led to its tragic and haunting demise. Before we dive into the story of the Essex, it's important to understand what whaling was and why it was such a prominent industry during the 19th century. Whaling was the practice of hunting and killing whales for their oil, meat, and other products. The oil was extremely valuable as it was used for lamps, making candles and lubricating the huge machinery of the industrial age. While we might scoff at the idea today, we must keep in mind that this was before the invention of crude oil, and whale products was literally greasing the industrial age and keeping the lights on for the world. Whaling was a major industry, particularly in America and Europe. Hundreds of ships set sail each year to hunt whales in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Southern Oceans. It was a dangerous and physically demanding job, requiring months, if not years at sea, in harsh and unpredictable conditions. The story of the Essex, however, will reveal the brutal and often inhumane practices of the industry, as well as the psychological toll it took on the crews who undertook these perilous voyages. On August 12, 1819, the Essex set sail from Nantucket, Massachusetts, on what was intended to be a routine whaling expedition. The ship was captained by George Pollard, Jr., a seasoned whaler. The Essex itself was a sturdy and well-equipped vessel, measuring 87 feet long and weighing approximately 238 tons. It was outfitted with a crew of 21 men, including Pollard's first mate, Owen Chase, and second mate, Matthew Joy. The youngest member of the crew was the cabin boy, Thomas Nickerson, who was only 14 years old. The plan was to sail south to the west coast of South America and hunt for whales, which were known to frequent the region in large numbers. As the Essex set sail, the crew was in high spirits, eager to embark on this adventure and reap the rewards that came with a successful whaling voyage. Little did they know that their voyage would go down in history as one of the most extraordinary tales of survival at sea. 2 days after Essex departed from Nantucket, a sudden squall struck the vessel while in the Gulf Stream. She was knocked on her beam ends and nearly sank, losing her top gallant sail, and 2 of her whaleboats were destroyed and 1 damaged. Nonetheless, Captain Pollard decided to continue the voyage without replacing the boats or repairing the damage. Essex rounded Cape Horn in January 1820, which was far slower than expected. This, combined with the earlier incident, caused the crew to speak of bad omens. Nevertheless, their spirits were lifted when they began the long spring and summer hunt in the warm waters of the South Pacific Ocean, traveling north along the western coast of South America up to the Spanish-ruled territory of the Royal Audience of Quito, present-day Ecuador. The crew of Essex was split into 3 groups of 6, each of which manned one of the 3 functioning whaleboats. Each of the whaleboats was led by one of the 3 officers, Pollard, Chase, and Joy. In September 1820, a sailor named Henry DeWitt deserted at Atacams, reducing the crew of Essex to 20 men. This was a major issue for Captain Pollard, since each of the 3 whaleboats needed a crew of 6, meaning only 2 men would remain to handle Essex during a whale hunt, which was not enough for a ship of her size and type. Whaling grounds were also exhausted, but encounters with other whaling ships, they learned of new hunting grounds about 2,500 nautical miles to the southwest known as the offshore ground. This was an immense distance from known shores for the whalers, and the crew had heard tales of cannibals inhabiting the many islands of the South Pacific. To restock their food supplies for the long journey, Essex sailed for Charles Island in the Galapagos Islands. The crew needed to fix a serious leak and initially anchored off Hood Island on October 8, 1820. During their stay, they captured 300 Galapagos giant tortoises to supplement the ship's food stores. They then set sail for Charles Island, where they took another 60 tortoises. The tortoises weighed between 100 and 800 pounds each. They were kept alive and allowed to wander the ship, with the rest kept in the hold stacked on top of each other. While hunting on Charles Island, helmsman Thomas Chappell decided to set a fire as a prank. It was the height of the dry season, and the fire quickly spread out of control, surrounding the hunters and forcing them to run through the flames to escape. By the time the men returned to Essex, almost the entire island was ablaze. Captain Pollard and the crew were infuriated about the fire. After a full day of sailing, the fire was still visible on the horizon. Fearing punishment, Chappell only later admitted that he had set the fire. When Essex eventually reached the promised fishing grounds, thousands of miles west of the coast of South America, the crew was unable to find any whales for days. This caused tension among the officers of Essex, particularly between Pollard and Chase. At 8 in the morning of November 20, 1820, the lookout spotted something, and the 3 remaining whaleboats set out to pursue a pod of sperm whales. Chase's boat harpooned a whale, but its tail struck the boat, forcing the crew to cut the harpoon line and return to Essex for repairs. 2 miles away, Pollard and Joy's boats each harpooned a whale and were dragged away from Essex. Chase was repairing the damaged whaleboat on board Essex when the crew spotted an abnormally large sperm whale bull, reportedly around 85 feet in length, acting strangely. It laid motionless on the surface facing the ship and then began to swim towards it, picking up speed by shallow diving. The whale rammed Essex, rocking her from side to side, and then dove under her, surfacing close on the ship's starboard side. The whale was motionless and appeared to be stunned. Chase prepared to harpoon it from the deck when he realized that its tail was only inches from the rudder, which the whale could easily destroy. Fearing to leave the ship stranded thousands of miles from land with no way to steer it, Chase hesitated. The whale recovered, swam several hundred yards ahead of the ship, and turned to face the ship's bow once again. The whale charged and crushed the bow, driving the vessel backwards, and then finally disengaged its head from the shattered timbers and swam off, never to be seen again, leaving Essex quickly going down by the bow. Essex was attacked approximately 2,000 nautical miles west of South America. After spending 2 days salvaging what supplies they could from the waterlogged wreck, the 20 sailors prepared to set out in the 3 small whaleboats. The boats were rigged with makeshift masts and sails. They managed to save 2 sets of navigational equipment and 2 copies of maritime charts. These were split between Pollard's and Chase's boats. Joy's boat was left without any means of navigating except to keep within sight of the other boats. Examining the charts, the officers deduced that the closest known islands, the Marquesas, were more than 1,200 miles to the west, and Captain Pollard intended to make for them, but the crew, led by Chase, voiced their fears that the islands might be inhabited by cannibals and voted to sail east instead to South America. Unable to sail against the winds, this would mean that they had to travel twice as far as the route to the Marquesas, but Pollard gave in to the crew's decision and the boats set their course due south. Food and water were rationed from the beginning, but most of the food had been soaked in seawater, which increased their thirst. After about 2 weeks the food was finished, and by this time the survivors were rinsing their mouths with seawater and drinking their own urine. Never designed for long voyages, all the whaleboats had been very roughly repaired, and leaks were a constant and serious problem. Storms and rough seas frequently plagued the tiny whaleboats, and the men who were not occupied with steering and trimming the sails spent most of their time bailing water from the boats. On December 20th, a full month after the whale attack, the crew of Essex found themselves in dire need of help. Hours away from dying of thirst, their boats landed on Henderson Island, an uninhabited coral atoll within the British territory of the Pitcairn Islands. The men found a small freshwater spring and began to gorge themselves on the island's endemic birds, crabs, eggs, and peppergrass. After 1 week, they had largely exhausted the island's food resources, and it was decided that the crew would set sail once again. 3 of the survivors, William Wright, Seth Weeks, and Thomas Chappell, chose to stay behind. The remaining 17 crew members of the Essex, now in 3 boats, resumed their journey on December 27th with the intention of reaching Easter Island. However, within 3 days the supplies they had stockpiled from Henderson had been depleted, leaving them with only a small reserve of bread. On January 4th, they estimated that they had drifted too far south to reach Easter Island, so they decided to make for Mas a Tierra instead. At this point, second mate Matthew Joy, whose health had been poor since leaving Nantucket, was dying. On January 10th, he became the first crew member to die and was buried at sea. Nantucketer Obed Hendricks assumed leadership of Joy's boat, which contained William Bond, Lawson Thomas, Charles Shorter, Isaiah Shepard, and Joseph West. The following day, Chase's whaleboat, which carried Richard Peterson, Isaac Cole, Benjamin Lawrence, and Thomas Nickerson, became separated from the others during a squall. On January 18th, Peterson died, and Cole died on February 8th. With food running out, the survivors resorted to cannibalism, eating his liver and kidneys. Hendricks' boat exhausted its food supplies on January 14th, and Pollard offered to share his boat's remaining provisions. Pollard's boat carried Samuel Reed, Owen Coffin, Barzillai Ray, and Charles Ramsdell. They ran out of food on January 21st, and Thomas died the following day. On January 23rd, Shorter died, and Shepard on January 27th, Reed died the following day, and the 2 boats separated. Hendricks' boat was never seen again and is presumed to have died at sea. By February 1st, the food on Pollard's boat was again exhausted. The men drew lots to determine who would be sacrificed for the survival of the remainder, and Owen Coffin, Captain Pollard's 18-year-old first cousin, drew the black spot. Lots were drawn again to determine who would be Coffin's executioner, and Charles Ramsdell drew the black spot. Ramsdell shot Coffin, and Pollard, Ramsdell, and Barzillai Ray consumed the body. Ray died on February 11th, and Pollard and Ramsdell survived by gnawing on Coffin's and Ray's bones. On February 18th, 89 days after the Essex sank, the British vessel Indian spotted and rescued Captain Chase, Owen Lawrence, and Thomas Nickerson, the 3 remaining survivors of the whaleboat. And on February 23rd, Pollard and Ramsdell were rescued by the Nantucket whaleship Dauphin after being sighted off the coast of Santa Maria Island. Pollard and Ramsdell were so dissociative that when the Dauphin came upon them, they were frightened and tried to fight them off. After the rescue, survivors were taken to the USS Constellation, where they were placed under the care of the ship's doctor who supervised their recovery. When officials heard that 3 more of their crewmates had been left behind on Henderson Island, the authorities asked the merchant vessel Surrey to search for them. The rescue mission was successful, and on April 5th, the last of the 8 survivors were rescued. Despite their harrowing experience, all 8 of the survivors went back to sea within a few months. Pollard returned to sea in early 1822, but after 2 more shipwrecks he was considered a Jonah, or unlucky sailor, and forced to retire. He subsequently became Nantucket's night watchman. Every November 20th, he would reportedly lock himself in his room and fast in memory of the men of Essex. First Mate Owen Chase returned to Nantucket to find he had a 14-month-old daughter he had never met. 4 months later he had completed an account of the disaster, the narrative of the most extraordinary and distressing shipwreck of the whaleship Essex. Herman Melville used it as one of the inspirations for his novel Moby Dick. In December, Chase sailed as first mate on the whaler Florida, until he could afford to build his own whaler, Charles Carroll. Chase remained at sea for 19 years. Memories of the harrowing ordeal on Essex haunted Chase, and he suffered terrible headaches and nightmares. Later in his life, he began hiding food in the attic of his Nantucket house on Orange Street and was eventually institutionalized. He died in Nantucket on March 7, 1869, aged 73. The cabin boy, Thomas Nickerson, became a captain in the merchant service and late in his life wrote his own account of the sinking, titled The Loss of the Ship Essex, Sunk by a Whale and the Ordeal of the Crew in Open Boats. Nickerson wrote this account 56 years after the sinking, in 1876, and it was lost until 1960. The Nantucket Historical Association published it in 1984. He died in February 1883, aged 77. The other surviving crew members met various fates. Thomas Chappell died of plague fever in Timor, while working as a missionary. William Wright was lost in a hurricane in the West Indies. Charles Ramsdell died in Nantucket on July 8, 1866, aged 62. Benjamin Lawrence died in Nantucket on March 28, 1879, aged 80. Seth Weeks died in Barnstable County, Massachusetts, on September 12, 1887, the last of the Essex survivors to die.